You're listening to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we talk about the results of the election in Venezuela, winning by a very slim margin, Nicolas Maduro over Enrique Capriles. We urge folks to go to the website, democracynow.org. Our guests are Rory Carroll, author of Comandante, Hugo Chávez's Venezuela, and The Guardian, and Mark Weisbrot's Center for Economic and Policy Research. Mark, your response to the critique of Rory Carroll to what's happened in Venezuela today?
Well, first, we don't want to exaggerate the advantage, or I'm not even sure the government really had an advantage. You know, their state television has about a 6% audience share, so that's not that much. And, you know, they even showed commercials for Capriles, for the opposition candidate, on state TV. And and then, of course, the print media is very much against the government, and the radio is probably against the government as well. And so, and of course, most of the wealth and income of the country is in the hands of the opposition. And they had plenty of ads. They were very sophisticated, a lot of resources. They ran a very good campaign. They did the same thing in the last election. So I think this is a fairly level playing field compared especially to the average election in Latin America. I mean, look at Mexico, for example, where you had the media really determine the outcome of the election in 2006 and probably 2012 as well, where the left of center candidate doesn't even have a chance, you know, with that kind of media duopoly as 95% of the media. So this is a competitive election. And I do think that there are serious problems the government has to deal with, and this should be a wake-up call for them. I mean, you know, what happened since the last election that I think might have moved some of the 3 or 4% that moved from Chávez to the other camp was the economy deteriorated some, you know, the shortages that Rory was talking about. This is a problem mostly in the exchange rate system that has been badly managed. So I think they need to stabilize the exchange rate. They need to make sure that foreign exchange is available like it was. You know, you had a recovery. I mean, the economy's been growing for almost 3 years now. And so it began to grow after the world recession and the recession that they had in the middle of 2010. And it grew, and growth accelerated, and inflation was actually falling, all right, up to the last, almost to the last election, while the economy accelerated. And so you didn't have the problems that you've had in the last 5 months with the shortages, and the increasing inflation that you've had in the last few months. So I think that definitely the government needs to stabilize the exchange rate. They need to bring inflation down, and those two things together will get rid of the shortages. As they have in the past. They've reduced them and gotten rid of them at some points. And I think that's what some of the things they're going to have to do. And they have to keep the economy growing and employment growing. I think they, you know, if the other side would have won, you would have had a classic austerity plan immediately, and they would have brought down inflation by having a recession. I hope that this government doesn't do that. They would have brought down imports as well the same way. I think this government can, in fact, resolve the problems of the exchange rate system and inflation while allowing the economy to grow, as they were doing right up to the last quarter of last year.
Rory Carroll, I wanted to get your response to Mark, as well as this comment following Chávez's death last month. We spoke to Carol Delgado, the Venezuelan consul general in New York. She'd returned to Caracas for the state funeral and praised Chávez's work for the poor.
Venezuela has reduced poverty dramatically, particularly extreme poverty. Venezuelans right now have education free up to the university level. We have free universal health for everyone, and those kind of achievements are fantastic.
Rory Carroll, your response.
Certainly there have been impressive social gains made in the past 10 years, but unfortunately there's a problem of sustainability, and a lot of those social gains appear to be fraying. Those steep falls in poverty appear to have more or less halted or certainly slowed very much since 2010, and in social programs. If you visit public hospitals in Venezuela, as I've done many times, it's pretty Dickensian in terms of there's broken glass. Often there are power shortages in the hospitals. People have to bring their own medicines. They have to bring their own bed sheets. Criminals can break into hospitals and threaten staff. And these are the main public hospitals in Caracas that we're talking about. If you go outside the capital, it can be even more grim. So I think there has to be a bit of a health warning, if you like, over some of the acclaim for some of these social programs, unfortunately. That said, yes, poverty has fallen and people have more money in their pockets, so and that's great. But the country is increasingly lost in a labyrinth of petropopulism. You need just to look at the statistics about the dependence on oil exports. I mean, now they're about 94% dependent for the foreign revenue on oil exports. And the reason for that, or the consequence of that, is that there really there are hidden degrees of unemployment because factories are, especially state-owned factories, are working at half capacity. I went to see that Guayana, the industrial heartland of Venezuela, and there's a whole chapter in the book about that, which shows that this great kind of manufacturing potential that Venezuela has really been squandered.
Rory, I wanted to ask you something. In your own newspaper, The Guardian said infant mortality is now lower than in 1999, from a rate of 20 per 1,000 live births to 13 in 2011. That poverty has decreased. In 1999, 23.4% of the population recorded as being in extreme poverty fell to 8.5% in 2011, according to official government figures. Can you talk about your trajectory of changing your view of Hugo Chávez when you first went down as a reporter, and what made you shift to your critique of him?
Yeah, I did. I was there for 6 years, from 2006 until last year, full-time, although I still regularly visit. And I think for me, the leitmotif is wasted opportunity. That with Hugo Chávez, he was an immensely gifted politician. He had such a strong mandate. He had the great fortune to coincide with this explosion in oil revenues. And there was such goodwill behind him. And yet, he was such a brilliant campaigner, but unfortunately, as a governor, as a ruler, he was incompetent, and he more or less admitted this towards the end. I mean, he was asked one time, "Do you have any regrets?" And he thought about it, and he said, "Well, mi gestión," almost like my management, and we see that in this kind of profound dysfunction. And just one example would be the infrastructure, the fact that they neglected to invest in infrastructure or maintain it, as a result of which now there are power cuts all the time, especially outside the city, outside Caracas. And yet the government, under Hugo Chávez and also now Nicolas Maduro, they resort to these kind of surreal excuses, like they blame mercenaries or maybe the CIA for sabotage. Rather than the more banal fact is that this reflects a decade of mismanagement. And that applies really to the wider economy. And I just think it's a wasted opportunity, because you just look further south to Brazil, and you can see there how they've made increasing, just as impressive reductions in poverty that are clearly much more sustainable.
I wanted to turn to, well, at the time, Foreign Minister Maduro in our studio. Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed the new elected president, Nicolas Maduro, in October of 2007. This was during the Bush years, when he served as Chávez's foreign minister. It was a year after Chávez had famously referred to then-President George W. Bush as the devil in a speech before the United Nations, saying, quote, "The devil came here yesterday. It smells like sulfur today." I asked Maduro what message he had for the United States.
Our message is a message, first of all, to draw a balance, of what has happened over the last months in the world, what happened in the world, what's been the role of the United Nations to guarantee peace, how much the world has lost as a result of this crazy policy that is apparently will be prolonged with this attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Could reach a crazy level if we pretend to take the way of war to a progress to attack the Iranian people. Our message remains the same. The world should open their eyes. The U.S. society should react. The U.S. people can do a lot for peace, for stability in the planet, for the recovery of the planet. The awareness in the world today, it's also expressed in the United States. And we need a large, humane alliance between the U.S. people and the peoples of the world, respecting our diversity, cultural diversity, our different ways to see the world, and establishing a relationship of equality. That's the main message, and this has been the message of President Chávez a year ago.
Venezuelan Foreign Minister. That was Venezuelan Foreign Minister Nicolas Maduro, who was just elected president yesterday in Venezuela. Mark Weisbrot, if you could tell us exactly who Nicolas Maduro is, where he comes from, and the significance of this election, and if you think in the call for the recount, is it possible that they would come up with different figures since this was such a razor slim margin that he won by yesterday?
Yes, well, it wasn't that. I mean, it was 1.6 percentage points and around 300,000 votes. So it's not going to be changed. And I mean, it's anything's possible. There could have been some mistake, but it's just really, really, really unlikely. And given the secure system they have, and Maduro has said, by the way, you know, Capriles asked for 100%. Of the ballots instead of normally they do like 54%, which is way more than you need. And he said basically yes. So I don't think there's going to be any doubt. In terms of Maduro, you know, he was the foreign minister for 6 years. He did a pretty good job, really. I think most people would recognize that. He comes from a left background. He was a union organizer and a bus driver. And I think he's going to continue, you know, a lot of the same policies. I want to just respond to Rory if I can, because I think he presented what you see in the media every day. Now, he didn't challenge the statistics that you gave on poverty and extreme poverty, and nobody does. But these are, you know, and those are huge changes in people's lives, you know. And, of course, all the other changes that we talked about, employment. I didn't even mention income, real income growth. But instead, the media focuses on everything that's bad. I mean, you could do that with the Clinton years. You know, Clinton presided over the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. And there were still a lot of bad things, you know, going on in the United States, even though unemployment hit record lows and you know, poverty reduced sharply, and it came back, by the way, after he was gone. But, you know, this is, you know, just presenting this completely one-sided picture that you see every single day. Yeah, the public hospitals deteriorated, but that's one of the reasons why they created, because they couldn't control the health ministry, so that's why they created the misiones to provide health care for millions of people there. And so, yeah, you know, there's no doubt that Rory's talking about problems. There were serious problems in administration. But to say that, you know, to just say that this was a failure, I mean, you know, you look at Venezuela, the 20 years prior to Chávez, where the economy actually shrank in a per capita basis. I mean, this is a huge improvement in people's living standards, and that's why they've won 15 out of the last 16 elections. It's not, as the media would have it, just because Chávez was a great performer and had a lot of charisma. I think that's very important for people to understand.
Rory Carroll, on the issue of those statistics, the figures that I just read, according to your own paper and to the government figures, the serious reduction in extreme poverty, your response to that?
Yes, well, I think, I mean, there's the function of two things. One is the oil prices increased from about $8 or $9 a barrel when Hugo Chavez took over. In 1999, they exploded up to more than $100 a barrel, and this put huge amounts of money into the Venezuelan treasury. And we saw in the 1970s, during a previous boom, that there are falls in poverty and that this generates lots of money in the economy. And Venezuela, above all, is a petrostate. And that, in a sense, this fall in poverty in many ways reflected that. But it did also reflect the lavish spending that Hugo Chávez's government did with this boom. They spent very generously on social programs, and rightly so. They invested a lot on reducing poverty, and that's all great. The problem, the catch, and it's a big one, is that the way they did it was clearly not sustainable. Instead of building an economy that with real jobs, which would give the poor people like a permanent leg up, I think we see a lot of the money has been spent on subsidies. The fact that gasoline is basically free, which is in a way a regressive subsidy. It benefits the middle class more than the poor. The fact that so many prices are kind of frozen, and that they have to send out the police and the army to try to enforce these price controls. Is this one indication of just how things are distorted there? And as Mark himself said, I mean, for example, they couldn't control the health ministry. Well, why not? I mean, they were the health ministry, and that's reflective of a wider dysfunction in the government. And therein lies a tragedy.
Mark Weisbrot.
Can I respond to that?
If you would respond, and
First of
also
all,
if you could talk about what has been the U.S. role in Venezuela.
Yeah, that's very important, too. I mean, but first let's talk about sustainability. For 14 years, all of the media, and especially the business press, 90% of the media, has been predicting economic collapse in Venezuela. They've always said it's unsustainable. I have these debates with opposition economists, and they don't dispute any of the statistics. All they say is next year it's going to collapse. Well, they've been saying this for 14 years, and it hasn't collapsed yet. They've had two recessions. One was caused by an opposition oil strike in 2002 and 2003, certainly not the government's fault, and the other that was caused in 2009 and half of 2010 that was brought on by the world recession. So it's not going to collapse. This idea of sustainability, that's just saying, we hope it collapses and it's going to collapse someday, and so we hope it's soon. And it's not going to, and they don't have an unsustainable debt. So unsustainable is like what we had in 2006 when you had an $8 trillion housing bubble, and everybody who was looking at it, which unfortunately wasn't most economists, could tell you that it was going to burst and it was going to cause a huge recession. Okay, they don't have those kinds of imbalances. They have a problem. They have inflation, and inflation is higher than their trading partners, and so that appreciates their real exchange rate, and that's why you had a devaluation. And this is an ongoing problem that they have to fix. But that isn't like what we had, where you have a giant bubble, asset bubble collapses, and you get a great recession out of it. So this is a lot of this is really exaggerated. Now, the other question about the U.S. role, that's very important because, Rory points to Brazil and says, well, they were able to do a lot of nice things, and they didn't have this polarization and conflict and all these things that we don't like. Well, that's great, but they weren't facing the same kind of opposition that had, according to Theodore Petkov, a leader of the opposition himself, said they had a strategy of military overthrow from 1999 to 2003, okay? Brazil didn't have that. They had the military was as nationalistic as the government. And they didn't have the United States on the side of this, not only the military, but the opposition, and telling them all along and pouring money in there and saying, you just, we get rid of everybody we don't like in this region, and you just hang in there, and you don't have to deal with this guy. You don't have to be part of a government. You can boycott the 2005 elections, as they did for the National Assembly. You can pretend that the 2004 referendum was stolen, even though Jimmy Carter, the Carter Center, certified it, and so did the OAS. This is what Chávez had to deal with. So, yeah, he was a polarizing figure, if you want to say that, but he was dealing with people who every time he offered them an olive branch, they just slapped him in the face. And they had no intention of ever dealing with him. And, in that sense, you can say there's progress, because here, at least, they're participating in elections. They started doing that in 2006, and they have started accepting the results. So there's some progress there. But again, this is the U.S. main, as I said, it's the number 1 or 2 target for regime change. The opposition knows that, and they don't feel like there's any reason to work with the government the way the opposition in Brazil does.
Rory Carroll, your quick response as we wrap up.
Well, I think there's so much bluster, really, in terms of the U.S.-Venezuelan relationship. Venezuela continues, and is always under Chávez, and will continue to do so, sells oil to the United States. Companies like Chevron operate in Venezuela. The United States will continue to buy Venezuela's oil. And I think the U.S.'s shameful role in the 2002 coup has been well documented, but that was more than a decade ago. And I think this heightened rhetorical attacks from Caracas really have been served largely now as a distraction, and the fact that we saw it reaching kind of surreal levels with Nicolas Maduro basically implicitly accusing the CIA or the United States of poisoning Hugo Chavez, of giving him cancer, and that's ridiculous.
Mark Weisbrot, on that one issue of the charges and the belief of many in Venezuela that the United States killed Hugo Chavez.
Well, they haven't presented any evidence, so until they do, I can't say that it has any validity. But I can understand why people would believe it. How many times did they try to kill Castro? And how many times have they, done things like that? They have White House has a kill list where they kill people they don't like every week. So, yeah, I mean, I can see why the people would believe that, but I have no idea whether there's any validity.
Well, we're going to leave it there, but we're going to, of course, continue to follow politics in Venezuela. I want to thank Mark Weisbrot from the Center for Economic and Policy Research and Rory Carroll, author of Comandante, Hugo Chávez's Venezuela. He also writes for The Guardian. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.